It was supposed to be my last day in town. It turned out to be the first day of my life. If you've ever found yourself with nowhere left to go, maybe you'll understand. Leave a comment below and let me know I'm not the only one. The dust from the main street coated everything I owned, which wasn't much. One canvas sack holding a change of clothes, a small tin of coffee, and a worn-out blanket. My horse, Patch, stood beside me, his dark brown coat faded by years of sun. His patience was the only steady thing I'd known. I had just been told by the boarding house owner that my room was no longer available. He didn't have to say why. A girl of 20, alone, with no family to speak for her, was a temporary arrangement at best. A loose thread in the town's fabric. Today, they had decided to pull it. I was standing by the water trough, letting Patch drink, trying to figure out which direction led to the least amount of trouble, when a man in a stiff, dark suit approached me. He was out of place here, like a crow in a flock of sparrows. His shoes were polished, but a fine layer of prairie dust had already tried to claim them. He held a leather folio and looked at me with an expression that wasn't unkind, just business. "Are you Faye?" he asked. His voice was dry, like old paper. I nodded, my hand resting on Patch's neck. People in town rarely used my name. I was usually just the girl. He opened the folio and pulled out a thick envelope sealed with wax. "My name is Mr. Abernathy. I am a solicitor. I was instructed to find you on your 20th birthday, or as close to it as I was able." He held the envelope out. "This is for you." I didn't move. Gifts were not part of my world. "Who is it from?" I asked. "A client who passed some years ago. A woman named Hester." The instructions were very specific. The delivery was to be delayed until you came of age, and only if you were unburdened. He chose the word carefully. I knew what he meant. Alone. He meant if I was still alone. I took the envelope. Inside was a heavy iron key, cold to the touch, and a deed. The paper was thick, the writing precise. It granted me sole ownership of a plot of land and a dwelling in the Whisperwind Peaks, 3 days' ride north. A place no one ever went. The solicitor, Mr. Abernathy, didn't offer any more information. He just tipped his hat and walked away, his polished shoes disappearing back into the dust he seemed so determined to defy. I stood there for a long time, the key in one hand and the deed in the other. Patch nudged my shoulder, as if to ask what was next. For the first time, I had an answer. North. I bought what supplies I could with the last of my money, dried meat, beans, a sack of oats for Patch. I didn't look back as we left the town behind. The single street, the false-fronted buildings, the faces in the windows that watched me go without expression, I was leaving nothing of value. The first day of the ride was across the flatlands. The sun was relentless. The world was a wash of brown and pale blue, the heat shimmering off the ground in waves. Patch plodded on, his pace steady and sure. He had been my father's horse, the only thing I had left of a man I barely remembered. He was old, but strong, and he knew how to walk a long road. We camped that night under a sky so full of stars it felt like a weight. The silence was absolute. Not the tense silence of town, where you could hear a door slam or a dog bark miles away, but a deep, breathing silence that seemed to belong to the land itself. I thought about the key in my pocket. It felt impossibly heavy, a weight of purpose I had never known. Who was Hester? Why choose me? The solicitor's word echoed in my mind. Unburdened. It was a gentle way of saying having nothing and no one. Maybe that was the qualification. You can't be afraid to lose what you've never had. On the second day, the land began to rise. We entered the foothills, winding our way through scrub brush and weathered rock formations. The air grew thinner, cooler. The world below us, the flat, dusty plain of my former life, shrank until it was just a hazy line on the horizon. I felt a lightness in my chest, a feeling so unfamiliar I almost didn't recognize it. It was hope. By the third day, we were deep in the mountains. The trail was barely a trail at all, more a suggestion of a path through towering pines and granite cliffs. The air smelled clean, of pine needles and cold stone. The sound of the wind through the peaks was a low hum, a constant song. It was the place from the deed. Whisperwind Peaks. Late in the afternoon, I saw it. Tucked into a high alpine meadow, sheltered by a sheer rock face, was a house. It wasn't a cabin. It was made of the same grey granite as the mountain around it, so solidly built it looked less like it had been constructed and more like it had been grown. A single stone chimney rose from a turf roof. There was one door, made of thick, dark wood, and two small windows that looked like watchful eyes. It was stark and severe, but it was also permanent. It looked like it had been there for 100 years and would be there for 100 more. Patch whickered softly, as if he knew our journey was over. I slid off his back, my legs stiff. I walked to the door, my boots crunching on the gravel. There was no handle, only a large, black iron keyhole. I pulled the key from my pocket. It slid into the lock with a heavy, satisfying click. The door swung inward without a sound, opening into shadow. I took a breath and stepped inside, out of the world I knew and into whatever came next. The inside of the house was not what I expected. There was no hearth, no table, no sign that anyone had ever lived here in the way I understood it. The air was cold and still, carrying the scent of ozone and damp earth. The single room was dominated by a huge metal table in the center. Etched onto its copper surface was a sprawling, intricate map of the entire valley below, from the peaks where I now stood all the way down to the dusty plains. Lines crisscrossed the map, converging and branching like veins. To one side of the room, the stone wall was covered in pipes, gauges, and levers of all sizes. The gauges were dark, their needles resting at 0. The levers were all in the upright position, coated in a thin layer of dust. It wasn't a house. It was a machine. A control room. On the far wall, there was a simple wooden desk and a chair. A leather-bound journal sat in the middle of the desk, placed as if someone had just set it down. I walked over to it, my footsteps the only sound in the cavernous silence. I ran my hand over the cover. It was worn smooth with use. I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was neat, the ink faded but clear. It read, "If you are reading this, then you are the new keeper. And you are needed." I sat in the cold, silent room for hours, reading the journal. The words belonged to Hester. She didn't write about her life, or her feelings. She wrote about the mountain. She wrote about water. The system in this room, she explained, was the heart of the valley. For generations, her family had been the protectors of a network of high-altitude springs, a secret source of water that fed the valley's main river from deep within the mountains. The house wasn't a house, it was the valley water control system. The map on the table wasn't just a map, it was a live display of the entire network. The levers and gauges controlled the flow, opening and closing hidden aqueducts, managing the pressure, ensuring that even in the driest years, the river below would never run empty. It was a legacy of quiet service, passed down through a line of keepers. She was the last of her line. She had no one to pass it to. Her final entries were dated from years ago. She wrote about searching for a successor. "It cannot be someone who craves power," she wrote. "Control is a poison. The keeper does not control the water. The keeper protects it. From drought, from rockslides, and from men." She wrote that she had watched the towns and settlements for years, looking for the right person. She needed someone who understood what it was to have nothing. Someone who knew the value of a single cup of clean water. Someone who would not be tempted to use this place for their own gain. "I watched you as a child," one entry read. "I saw you share your portion of bread with a stray dog. I saw you mend a fence for a neighbor who never thanked you. You are quiet, and you are strong. You do not ask for notice. You are a protector by nature. You are the one foot me." She had chosen me. A feeling washed over me, so powerful it made my chest ache. It wasn't pride. It was belonging. I had never belonged anywhere. to a family, to a town. But Hester believed I belonged here. To this mountain. To this duty. I spent the next few days learning. I traced the lines on the copper map with my fingers, matching them to the descriptions in the journal. I cleaned the dust from the gauges, my cloth sliding over the cool glass. I touched the levers, feeling the weight of them, the responsibility they represented. I brought Patch to a small, lush meadow behind the house where a spring bubbled up from the ground, the very source of it all. He drank deeply, and I felt a connection to the water, to the system, to Hester. I was no longer an orphan, a castaway. I was the keeper. One morning, a week after I arrived, something changed. A low humming sound started deep within the walls, a vibration I felt more in my bones than heard with my ears. I went inside. On the main console, a small brass plaque I hadn't noticed before was glowing with a soft, internal light. The words on it were simple: flow redistribution active. I checked the main pressure gauge. The needle, which had been steady, was now twitching. It dropped a fraction, then another. I looked at the copper map. In the eastern foothills, a tiny red light was blinking. It was faint, but it was there. A warning. I went back to the journal, my hands trembling slightly. I found the section on warnings. Hester wrote about the system's ability to self-regulate. If an unnatural drain occurred somewhere in the network, a break, or a deliberate tap, the system would automatically try to compensate by rerouting flow from other channels. That was the humming. That was the plaque. The blinking red light on the map indicated the source of the drain. Someone was interfering with the water. My heart beat a little faster. Hester's words came back to me. The keeper protects it. From drought, from rock slides, and from men the last part had seemed like a distant possibility, a story from the past. Now, it was a blinking red light on my map. I spent the rest of the day watching the console. The humming continued, a constant, low thrum of a machine under stress. The pressure gauge kept dropping, slowly but steadily. The red light on the map did not go out. It pulsed with a steady, menacing rhythm. I felt a cold knot of dread tighten in my stomach. I was the keeper. But what was I supposed to do? The journal gave instructions for maintenance, for managing seasonal flow, for clearing blockages after a storm. It said nothing about how to stop a thief. As night fell, the humming grew louder. The stone floor beneath my feet seemed to buzz with the effort. Another light began to flicker on the console, this one amber. System pressure falling below tolerance. I was no engineer. I was just a girl who had spent her life trying to be invisible. But Hester had chosen me. She must have believed I could do this. I stayed awake all night, watching the lights, listening to the strained sound of the machinery. The responsibility felt like a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders. This was my first test. And I was failing. The next morning, the ground shook. It was a distant, muffled boom that echoed up through the granite. Blasting. The red light on the map was brighter now, and it was moving. Slowly, methodically, it was crawling up the mountain. Towards me. They weren't just tapping into a stream. They were digging their way to the source. I frantically searched the last pages of Hester's journal, looking for an answer, a weapon, anything. Her final entries were hurried, the script less precise. She wrote of one man in particular. A rancher named Barrett. He had come to the valley years ago, buying up land, damming the public creeks, hoarding water for his own vast herds while smaller farms withered. He was powerful, and he was greedy. Barrett knows there is more water in these mountains, she wrote. He can feel it. He has been searching for my family's secret for a decade. He believes it is his right to own it, to control it. He does not understand that some things cannot be owned. The name hit me like a physical blow. Barrett. I knew that name. He owned the largest ranch in the territory. He owned the bank. He owned the mercantile. He was the man who had bought the boarding house last month. He was the reason I had been kicked out. It wasn't random. He had been systematically clearing away anyone in the lower town who wasn't tied to him, anyone who might get in his way. He hadn't known about me, not specifically. I was just a piece of loose gravel swept aside as he cleared his path. A path that led directly here. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. The man who had made me homeless had inadvertently sent me to the one place that could stop him. Another boom, closer this time. A fine shower of dust drifted down from the ceiling. I looked at the map. The red light was at the base of my mountain. He was close. I looked at the levers, the gauges, the complex system I barely understood. How could I fight a man like that? He had wealth, and men, and explosives. I had a horse, a key, and a journal. But Hester's words gave me a sliver of courage. You are a protector by nature, so I wasn't here to fight. I was here to protect. The two things were not the same. The humming of the machinery stopped. The sudden silence was more alarming than the noise had been. Every light on the console went out, except for one. A single, large red lamp pulsed above a lever set apart from all the others. It was bigger, heavier, painted black with a thick iron handle. A brass plate at its base read, "Mountain Lock." I found the final, single page in the journal, tucked into a pocket in the back cover. It was about this lever. It was the system's last resort. The ultimate act of protection. The Mountain Lock, Hester wrote, was a failsafe of her great-grandfather's design. If the heart of the system was ever about to fall into the wrong hands, this lever would activate a series of deep earth charges. Not explosives, but powerful mechanisms that would permanently collapse the main arteries of the network, rerouting the entire water source into a deep, unreachable subterranean aquifer. It would save the water, preserving it deep within the earth. But it would sever it from the valley. The river would shrink to its natural, meager state. The failsafe would be gone. The valley would be on its own. To use it is to sacrifice the present to save the future, she wrote. It is a terrible choice. A choice I pray you never have to make. It is the final duty of the keeper, to know when to let go. I stood before the lever, my hand hovering over the iron handle. The choice was mine. I could let Barrett take control, and watch him turn the valley's lifeblood into his personal property. Or I could pull this lever, and take that power away from everyone. Including myself. The front door creaked open. A man stood silhouetted against the bright afternoon light. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face accustomed to getting its way. He looked around the room, his eyes taking in the silent machinery, the dark map. His gaze settled on me. So. This is it, he said. His voice was calm, confident. This was Barrett. I've been looking for this place for a very long time. He took a step inside, his boots echoing on the stone floor. He wasn't looking at me like a threat. He was looking at me like a minor inconvenience. Like a squatter to be removed. Barrett walked slowly towards the central console, his eyes scanning the levers and gauges with a hungry expression. He ran a hand over the dark copper map. Magnificent, he murmured. He finally turned his full attention to me. He was not armed, at least not openly. He didn't need to be. His power was in his presence, his absolute certainty. You've been a ghost, he said, his voice holding no menace, only a hint of curiosity. I had my men check every deed, every claim in these mountains. This place didn't exist, it was protected, I said quietly. My voice sounded small in the huge room. He gave a short, dry laugh. Protected by an old woman's superstitions. I knew it was here. My grandfather used to tell stories. A hidden river in the mountain. I thought he was a fool. But greed is a patient thing. He took another step closer. I don't want to hurt you, girl. I just want what's mine. This valley is mine. The water that feeds it should be mine, too. It doesn't belong to anyone, I said, my voice gaining a little strength. I was reciting Hester's words, her belief. Everything belongs to someone, he countered, his tone hardening. It belongs to whoever is strong enough to take it. And I am strong enough, he gestured to the main console. Now, step aside. Your time playing games in here is over. He saw the machinery as a source of power, a tool for his ambition. He couldn't see the truth of it. It wasn't about power. It was about balance. About duty. He started to walk towards the main bank of levers, the ones that controlled the flow to the valley. He was going to turn it all on, divert everything to his own land. He didn't see the single red light pulsing over the mountain lock. He didn't see the one choice he had left me. My hand closed around the cold iron handle of the black lever. It was heavy, anchored deep in the machinery. It would take all my strength. Barrett saw the movement. His eyes narrowed. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't touch anything." He started moving towards me, faster now. I protected it, I said, more to myself than to him. I was the keeper. This was my purpose. He lunged for me. But I was already moving. I put my whole body into it, pulling the heavy iron lever down. It resisted, groaning, scraping against metal that hadn't moved in a century. For a moment, I thought it wouldn't budge. Then, with a final, shuddering jolt, it locked into the downward position. A deep, resonant boom echoed from the heart of the mountain. It wasn't an explosion. It was a profound, final thud, like a giant's door slamming shut miles beneath our feet. The entire structure shook. A cascade of dust rained down from the ceiling. The single red light above the mountain lock went out. Every gauge needle dropped to zero. Every screen went dark. A deep, profound silence fell over the room. The humming was gone. The life of the machine was gone. I had killed it. Barrett stood frozen, staring at the dead console. "What did you do?" he whispered, his voice cracking with disbelief. He scrambled to the main levers, pulling one, then another. They moved uselessly in his hands, disconnected from everything. He spun back to me, his face a mask of fury. "What did you do?" he shouted, his voice echoing in the dead silence. "I protected the water," I said. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. "From you, you destroyed it. You foolish girl, you destroyed it all." "No," I said. "It's still there. Just deeper. Where you can't reach it. Where no one can." The realization dawned on his face. The power he had spent a lifetime chasing was gone. Not stolen by a rival, but put permanently beyond his, or anyone's, grasp. His anger was the only thing holding him together. It was his only vulnerability. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was almost a physical force. He looked at the useless machinery. Then, without another word, he turned and stormed out of the house, a man whose entire world had just been taken from him by a girl with nothing. I stood there, alone in the silent room, my hand still resting on the lever that had changed everything. The mountain was quiet. I stayed in the house on the mountain. There was nothing for me in the valley, and everything for me right here. The control room remained silent, a tomb for a power that was now at rest. The copper map was just a piece of metal. The gauges were just glass and brass. Their purpose was over. My purpose, I learned, was just beginning. I was no longer the keeper of a system. I was the keeper of a memory, a guardian of a promise. I watched the valley from the high meadow. In the weeks that followed, the river shrank. It didn't dry up completely, but it lessened, returning to the meager flow that nature had always intended for it. Panic took hold down below. I could imagine the angry meetings, the accusations. Barrett's power, which had been built on his control of the existing water, crumbled. With no secret source to seize, his dams and diversions were not enough. He was just another rancher facing a dry year. He was diminished. The valley had to learn a new way to live. They had to work together. They built cisterns to catch the rain. They learned to plant crops that didn't demand so much from the soil. They learned the value of a single drop of water, a lesson Hester's system had allowed them to forget. They survived. They endured. They never knew why the river had failed, or why it had been so generous for so long. They never knew about the girl on the mountain who had made a terrible, necessary choice on their behalf. I didn't need them to know. My reward wasn't recognition. It was the quiet hum of the wind in the pines. It was the solid feel of the granite walls at my back. It was the sight of Patch grazing peacefully in the meadow, his coat shining in the clear mountain sun. I had come here with nothing but a horse and a sack of belongings. I had been given control over the lifeblood of an entire land. And in my first and final act as keeper, I had given it all away. I had not gained wealth or status. I had gained a home. I had found my place. Not among people, but as part of the mountain itself. A silent, watchful protector of a sleeping power. And for a girl who had never belonged anywhere, it was more than enough. It was everything.